Imagine waking up one morning. The air is still. The guns are finally silent. This was the world of 1920, a planet holding its breath after the single greatest cataclysm it had ever known. The First World War. The war to end all wars was over. But the peace, that was a different story altogether. 4 millions. The war never truly ended. It walked with them on prosthetic legs. It stared back from their disfigured reflections in the mirror. In France, they were called Les Girls, Cassies, the broken faces. These were the men who had survived the trenches, but at a cost that was etched onto their very skin. Surgeons were pioneering new techniques in what would become plastic surgery, trying to rebuild not just faces, but identities. And then there were the invisible wounds. Today, we call it PTSD, but in 1920, it was crudely dismissed as shell shock. Men who had endured unimaginable horrors, constant bombardment, the loss of comrades, the terror of no man's land were now seen as weak or cowardly. They suffered from uncontrollable tremors, haunting nightmares, and crippling anxiety. Families didn't understand. Doctors didn't understand. These veterans were heroes on parade day, but a burden in everyday life, left to fight a silent, lonely battle in their own minds. The landscape itself bore the scars. Across northern France and Belgium, the Zone Rouge, or Red Zone, was a poisoned wasteland. The earth was a churned-up mess of mud, unexploded shells, chemical agents, and the remains of the fallen. It was so devastated, so toxic, that large parts were deemed unfit for human life. The phrase, the lost generation, wasn't just a literary term. It was a demographic reality. People turned to spiritualism, desperately trying to contact their lost loved ones at sea. It was a time of deep, collective mourning, a search for meaning in the face of such overwhelming loss. Memorials began to rise in every town square, simple stone monuments engraved with impossibly long lists of names. The tomb of the unknown soldier became a sacred symbol, a grave for every mother's son who never came home. Politically, the world was a tinderbox. The old empires died. Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the Russian had crumbled, leaving a power vacuum. New nations were being born from the ashes. Places like Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Yugoslavia, but their borders were drawn by politicians in Paris, often with little regard for the complex mix of ethnicities on the ground. These new lines on the map were planting the seeds for future conflicts. In Germany, the situation was dire, humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, which forced them to accept all blame for the war and pay crippling reparations. The nation was reeling. Their economy was in ruins. Their people were starving, and their government, the new Weimar Republic, was seen as weak and illegitimate. Political violence was rampant as extremist groups from both the left and right fought for control in the streets. A sense of betrayal, the Stab-in-the-Back myth, festered, creating a fertile ground for demagogues who promised to restore Germany's honor. France, though victorious, was exhausted and paranoid. Having borne the brunt of the fighting on the Western Front, their primary goal was to ensure Germany could never threaten them again. They pushed for harsh punishments and built massive fortifications like the Maginot Line, a concrete symbol of their deep-seated fear. Across the Atlantic, America was retreating into isolationism. Horrified by the carnage they had witnessed, the American people rejected the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations, the very organization their own president, Woodrow Wilson, had championed. They wanted to turn their backs on Europe's endless quarrels and focus on themselves. This withdrawal left the fledgling League of Nations without its most powerful potential member, crippling it from the start. Even the victors faced turmoil. In Britain and Italy, returning soldiers expected a land fit for heroes, but instead found unemployment and economic hardship. Strikes and social unrest became common as people demanded the better world they had been promised for their sacrifice. Yet, amid the despair, there were glimmers of hope. The 1920s were about to roar. In the cities, a new energy was taking hold. Women, who had taken on new roles during the war, were demanding more rights, including the right to vote in many countries. New technologies that had been developed for the war, like airplanes and radio, were beginning to find peacetime applications, promising to connect the world in new ways. Art and culture were exploding, with new movements like Dadaism and Surrealism, which rejected the old, rational world that had led to such destruction. People wanted to forget, to live for the moment. The Jazz Age was dawning, a frantic, vibrant soundtrack for a world desperate to dance away its trauma. So, 1920 was a paradox. It was a year of profound loss and lingering pain, a world of ghosts and scars. But it was also a year of new beginnings, of fragile hope, and of a desperate, powerful desire to rebuild. It was the first uncertain step out of the darkness of the Great War and into the blinding, unpredictable light of a new modern era. The world had been broken, but it was determined to put itself back together, piece by painful piece. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time.